Lesson 3.2, Measuring with a Ruler. Suppose you and your classmates are going to have a watermelon seed spitting contest. How would you measure the distance the seeds travel? Well, first you should think about what we can measure in. And there are two systems that we measure in. There's the metric system and the US customary system. And most of the world uses the metric system to measure, while the United States and just a few other places in the world use the customary system. So think about how we could measure in the metric system and the US customary system. Do you know any measurements in either of those? Well, in the metric system, we can measure with millimeters, centimeters, meters, or kilometers. In the US customary system, we can measure in inches, feet, yards, or miles. So which one would make sense for measuring the distance that you could spit watermelon seeds? First, if we look in metric, millimeters are very, very tiny. They are about the width of a dime. So I don't think I would pick millimeters. Centimeters are about the width of your pinky finger. Meters are about the width of a doorway or a large step for an adult. And kilometers are about kilometer is about 10 football fields long. I don't think you can spit 10 football fields. So the best way to measure using metric might be centimeters or possibly meters if you can spit it pretty far. How about in the US customary system? Inches. An inch is about the length of a paper clip, or the width, or how wide a quarter is. Feet are 12 inches. A yard is a big step for an adult, and a mile is 15 football fields. So to measure how far you can spit watermelon seeds, you might use feet, probably. If you can spit far, you might use yards, but feet would probably be a good way to measure in the customary system. Here is a very zoomed in picture of a ruler. You can see the top is inches and the bottom is centimeters. Let's see here. We'll make that a little bit smaller so you can see the whole thing. There we go. So if we take a look at this ruler, the ruler you use will probably not be this zoomed in, but you notice that here is 0. And if you look across, this wouldn't be 1 because that's a smaller tick mark. So we look across and see here, this must be 1. And looking across, we can see where 2 inches is, and the end is 3 inches. So this ruler is cut off at 3 inches. Now, what we've been practicing in class is what happens if you take 1 inch and you cut it in half. How many pieces do I now have of the inch? Well, if you notice, and I can show with a jump, that here's 1 piece and here's another piece. So that 1 inch I've cut into 2 pieces, and I'm only at 1 piece out of them. So if I cut the inch in half, I have half of an inch. Now if I cut the next inch in half, I jump to here, that would be called 1 1/2, because I went a whole inch to get here, and then I went another half. So that's 1 1/2. Next would be 2. And if I cut the next one in half, it would be 2 1/2. The next jump would get me to 3 inches. And we can do the same thing with centimeters. Down on the bottom, you can see where 0 is. Here is 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 3. And this is the metric system now that we're using on the bottom, because centimeters are part of the metric way to measure. And if you notice, inside of the centimeters are 10 pieces. It's been cut into 10 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is halfway. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 pieces, and each of those little pieces is 1 millimeter. And since we just counted them, you would know that 10 millimeters equals 1 centimeter. So if we cut those millimeters in half, or the centimeters in half, excuse me, that would be half of a centimeter. Then we get to the whole centimeter. If we go another half, 1 1/2, 2, 2 1/2, 3, 3 1/2, 4, 4 1/2, 5, and we could keep going. So every time I cut it in half, after 3 will be 3 1/2. Here is another ruler to show you a little bit about fourths. Because notice here is my 1 inch and here is 0. So 0 and 1. And if we cut that inch in half, we know that that's half. So there's 1/2. Now if I cut those halves in half again, take a look at what those marks are. How many pieces have I cut the inch into? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 pieces now. So this first tick mark here would be 1 out of 4. So 1/4. If I go another one, that would be 2 out of 4. And 2/4 is the same as 1/2. If I go another one, I've gone 3 pieces out of 4. And the whole thing would be 4 out of 4, and that's the same as 1. If you cut it into 4 pieces and you go all 4 of them, you're at 1 whole. So if I were to go out to here, that would be 3 1/4. So if I cut the inch into 4 pieces, I have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and the whole thing. Measure this line segment to the nearest ½ inch. So what we should do first is mark the 0. Whoops. So I will mark the 0 spot, and then I'll find 1. Those are the easiest things to find, 0 and 1, because I know this line segment is pretty short. The next thing I should find would be half, because it's to the nearest ½ inch. So it might be 0, half, 1, 1 1/2, 2. So I just need to move this line segment right over to where I want it. And it looks like it's closest to the 1/2. So to the nearest ½ inch, it would be ½ inch. Measure this line segment to the nearest ½ inch. So I'll find the 0 and 1. These are my little tick marks here. This would be 2. So now I can tell it's between 1 and 2. So here's half. What would this mark be? 1 1/2. So let's see which one it's closest to. Looks pretty close to 1 1/2 inches. So 1 1/2 inches. Measure this line segment to the nearest ½ inch. Maybe I'll move it over here first now, and then we can mark to see where it's close to. Okay, so here is 0, here's 1, here's 2. It looks to be in between 2 and 3. So I should find the half first, so that's 2 1/2. Is it closer to 2 or is it closer to 2 1/2? Because when I measure to the nearest ½ inch, it's not always going to end in 1 because notice as I jump for a 1/2 inch, 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. So it might be a whole inch even when we're measuring to the nearest 1/2 inch. And I can see that it's just barely less than halfway, because here's halfway. And it's less than halfway, so it's closer to 2 inches. Remember, to measure to the nearest inch or centimeter, it will be 1, 2, 3, some whole number. So to the nearest inch, it would be 1, 2, whoops, not quite. And that first one is 0, 1, 2, 3. Or to the nearest centimeter, it might be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Remember, to measure to the nearest 1/2 inch or centimeter, it will be 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Those type of numbers will be to the nearest 1/2 inch. So I can label them on the bottom here as well. Here's 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, and so on.